Welcome to another episode of the Luke Humphrey Running Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Humphrey, and our mission is to help you maximize your training through a blend of science and practicability. So let's get going. All right. Hey, welcome back, guys. It's Luke with LukeHumphreyRunning.com, and today we're going to talk about strength recovery intervals, right? So last week we talked about the recovery for speed workouts, and if you didn't catch that one, I'll have it posted in the show notes / blog post, so be able to catch up on that. But this week I just want to talk about the next group of repeats that we do in the marathon training, and those would be the strength repeats. Traditionally, these are done at 10 seconds faster than marathon pace per mile. You'll see them written as MP minus 10 a lot of times. And if you're familiar with HMM at all, you'll recognize that the workouts are 6 by mile, 4 by mile and a half, 3 by 2 miles, and 2 by 3 miles. And so the recovery on those are a quarter mile jog recovery for the 6 by 1, and the 4 by 1 and 3 by 2 each have a half mile jog recovery, while the 2 by 3 has the most recovery, which is 1 mile jog recovery. And so if you're looking at the recovery from a ratio standpoint, then the amount of recovery we are getting from each repeat is minimal compared to the amount of work that we're doing. But you have to also consider, though, that the intensity of the repeat is going to be far lower than, say, what we talked about in speed workouts last week. The other aspect to consider is the ability of the runner. The faster the runner, the closer that they're going to get to lactate threshold. So I'll use myself for an example. When I was at my peak, I would be training at 5 minutes to 5:05 per mile for the marathon, which then would make my strengths workouts at 4:50 to 4:55. And then put that in perspective, my half marathon PR was about 4:52 a mile. So with me, it all tied in nicely, and it did mostly with all my teammates as well. We were all kind of in that same boat. But I fully recognize this, that if your goal marathon pace is, say, 10 minutes a mile, then there's not a huge difference there between 9:50 and 10 minutes, right? So a lot of you, I see, you'll post your workouts on our Facebook group or whatever the case is, and we'll see that you're averaging close to 9:50 for your marathon tempos for a lot of you. So it doesn't feel the same way for you as it would for me. Like, my intensity would be a lot higher than, say, somebody in that 10-minute range. So that's going to feel just more like a harder, easy run for some of you, right? So, and there's a lot of reasons that could be, and we talked about this a little bit before, but, essentially maybe you aren't really sure where you're going to be going for a goal time, and so we're basically just starting some point, right? So, but there's lots of situations where it might be. But in any case, 9:50 might not feel significantly faster than your 10 minutes, and then you find yourself even cheating that down a little bit. But I think before we get into adjusting recovery for these, that we have to consider what we are trying to get out of these. And so for fast runners, we just talked about, it's accumulating volume at or just under your lactate threshold. And by faster, I mean really anything faster than, say, 7:30 or so. And that's definitely a gray zone. It's not an exact by any stretch of the imagination. But for these people, they'd really be in the danger zone of their marathon pacing. So if you are, say, a goal pace of 8 minutes a mile and you go out at 7:50 a mile, you run the risk of really crashing and burning if you continue on that 7:50. Like, your room for error is a lot less than, say, that person who's at 10-minute miles and they go out at 9:50. That's definitely not going to put them over the edge of lactate threshold, and so it's not going to be as dangerous for them to do that. Do I advise it? No, because I'd like you to be able to control your pace a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's a lot more dangerous the faster you are going out a little bit. So that's one thing to really think about. You're not at LT, but you're at a point where it's not going to be sustainable, right? And so you'll still be producing a lot of lactic byproduct, and you're really going to be burning through carbohydrates at a faster pace if you're in that faster zone there. So You really, really want to be careful of that. Now, for runners below that 330 range, like I said, really, the more close you get to being at 4 hours and beyond, you're not producing that big amounts of byproduct like we talked about. You're not producing a ton of lactic acid. We're not really running that risk. But we're really stressing the aerobic threshold, which is kind of the point where, we'll start seeing an inflection of lactic byproducts. So if you've ever seen a lactate curve, it's, gradual, boom, and then it just starts exploding up. So really aerobic threshold is really that point where you just start to see an increase in lactic production, but it's at such a low level that it's recycled back to the liver, the heart uses some, and then it's whatever's being produced is being utilized. But what it does mean is that we're starting to burn more carbohydrate than fat. So with these folks, we're not necessarily working on improving lactate threshold as we would be with the faster runners, but rather we're trying to boost their fuel efficiency and accumulating harder miles closer to MP. So we're really kind of teaching you from a physiological standpoint, we're trying to teach the body to really get to that point where we're just stressing the usage of carbohydrates. So if we're just above that point, we can really kind of trigger the body to become better at burning fat. And so that's really the bigger thing that we're trying to get out of these than for the fast runners where we're actually in lactate threshold. So for the other runners, and I say slow runners, don't take that personal, but we're saying that you're getting that LT development through the speed work where we're doing it more at like 10K pace in that region, right? So we're still hitting those things and we're just doing different things to get those different thresholds, right? And so with you, it's really more, that's what's going to make you a better runner at this point, is being better at burning fat. And so if we can just stress that with these strength intervals, you're going to develop that a lot quicker. And so as for recovery, the trend, right? So the faster the repeat, it'll result in shorter repeats with a higher ratio of rest to work. As you creep down to LT range, the repeats lengthen out and the volume of rest increases, right? And the volume increases, right? So for speed, we're doing 3 miles worth of work. We have a fair amount of recovery per repeat. As we creep down to something that's closer to LT in the lactate threshold range, so it's either it still might be speed for slower runners, but those runners tend to not do those type of workouts to begin with, so it's already going to be a more volume for them. And then as we go to the strength stuff, for faster runners, it's going to be more LT, lactate threshold stuff, but we're going to also be increasing the overall volume to 6 miles worth of work. And so for people who this is, say the 4 hour group, we're still doing that 6 miles worth of work, but what we're trying to accomplish is changing. But overall, repeats lengthen out, volume increases, and rest to work ratio decreases. Let me change that real quick. Oh, don't want that to get in. That'd be the opposite of what we want. So once you get close to marathon pace, the work to rest ratio will be the lowest. And so that's where kind of we get in that gray zone with strength repeats, because for some people, like the 4 hour group, we're pretty close to MP, right? And so does the rest still need to be that long? So when I would do a workout, like say 3 by 2 miles, they would be done in say 10 minutes per repeat. A half mile jog recovery would be 3:45 to 4 minutes usually. So that'd be a ratio of 0.4 to 1, or about 40%. And so I do see faster runners do similar workouts when they're really truly LT, and they'll do them with 3 minutes jog recovery. So we can see we're doing a little bit more. However, I'll say this, they're not usually training for a marathon. When I see some of the elites doing that, they're training for half marathons, 10K, stuff like that. So that's really more important to them at that point, I think, than for us, what we're trying to accomplish with the marathon training. And but the point for us is that it's still fairly slow, or a very low recovery time, right? But let's say that you are doing the same workout at about 20 minutes a repeat. So that same 3 by 2 miles, we're doing at 10-minute pace, roughly. A half mile jog might be closer to 6 to 7 minutes. So you're still going to be pretty close to that 40% range. But the bottom line is your recovery is going to be less per the amount of work that you're doing. So then the question becomes, should we adjust that? And when looking at it by the number standpoint, I'd lean towards the idea of, just, we're still, it's still fairly long recovery based on the pace of the work, but I think we have to look at all the other factors too. So I keep looking back at the intensity of these, the volume, and the timing of the workouts, and that kind of makes me pause a little bit on just making that decision to just say, okay, we'll just shorten the recovery up. And so first off, I'd like to say that if you're new to the philosophy, then don't make it harder than they are, right? Don't make those repeats harder than they already are. If you are comfortable with the workouts and your pace is maybe getting way too fast, but you're not really putting the effort in, you're running naturally, and you just look down at your watch and holy cow, I'm 25 seconds fast. Maybe we consider that, right? So if we're in that 40% range for recovery, maybe try decreasing the recovery to 30% of the time doing work. So say, for instance, if you're doing 6x1 mile at 10 minutes for your strength, and you're doing a quarter mile jog in 3 minutes, or 4 minutes, maybe we cut that down to 3 minutes, or 30%, or 3 minutes, and see so you can either try to get that quarter mile in 3 minutes instead of 4 minutes, or we just cut it down to 3 minutes and you go out and back a half mile or a minute and a half, and then start your next repeat or whatever you want to do, but just do a time-based recovery instead of just doing a quarter mile. Easier thing I think that might be able to do is back the 6x1 mile off to a 200 meter jog or an eighth of a mile, 4 by a mile and a half, and the 3x2, cut that back to a quarter mile, and then the 2x3 maybe cut back to a half a mile jog recovery, and just see how it goes, right? And so, your true recovery might be somewhere that might be too short, but the prescribed recovery might be too long. So maybe you settle in somewhere in the middle. I don't know. I'm definitely open to experimentation on that, but I do think that if you've really got to be through the programs a couple times, and you really have to know how you feel when you get to that strength block of training. So in essence, I'd want to be cautious, right? Because the other worry I have really is the timing of the workouts. So you'll be in peak volume of the training, right? So this is like weeks, 10 to 18 or 12 to 18 of the classic plans, and that's where people tend to really start feeling fatigued, really start feeling tired. So do you want to just make a workout even harder at that point? And when in theory it might be like a good idea, but in reality it might be better just to pull the reins back a little bit and just let that ride out as prescribed, because the last thing you want to do is be a workout hero but then not even make it to the starting line, right? So you really have to be careful on there. So I know I was pretty vague on this, but I do think there is something to explore in the right situations. I think that's where being in our group, being in our run club, having a coach, keeping really good track of your previous data, knowing what you were able to do during those training cycles in the past. Those things should guide you. Having those conversations should guide you whether or not it's a really good idea. And I would just consider, like, if you start doing these and you cut those recovery times on the strength, but then all of a sudden now your workouts are starting to fade, or you're never even hitting the paces on those workouts, clearly something's got to give. And if that's what you adjusted, that's what needs to be readjusted back to what it was before, right? So I think you have to be careful on that. And so, make sure I didn't miss anything. So I think that's the big thing. I don't want you to take this as a free pass to just push the pace and then take less recovery. I want you to focus more on controlling the pace and recognizing the effort. And that's another big part of the strength workouts. So some of it's not even physiological. Some of it's more mental based, where you're in a place where you could push harder if you wanted to, but you've got to kind of put some control on there as well. And that's just as important in the marathon from saying, okay, I feel good, I'm just going to push harder, right? And so maybe that's not the best option to do when you're trying to marathon, and especially if patience isn't necessarily your best thing. Strength workouts definitely give you an opportunity to work on those things. So that's the other thing that I would really consider. But I would say focus on controlling pace and recognizing the effort, and then see if you can maintain that pace with less recovery and handle that throughout the entire workout. So if you can do those things, then I'd say it's okay. But if you do them for a week or two and things start going downhill, fix it before it becomes unfixable, right? Or that time has to be taken off. And remind you, this is in the peak of the training, so this is where you're getting into crunch time, right? And so this is not the time where you want to be forced into taking extra days off if you don't have to, right? And so again, if you do it, monitor it, but go into it thinking it through all the way before just deciding that you're going to reduce your recovery time. So anyways, if you go through those things, you go through that checklist type of setting, and it makes sense to you to try it, give it a go, and then just adjust if you need to. But if you try it, best of luck. Let us know how it goes, and be happy to continue this conversation. I'd really be inclined to see how it goes for people who try to do it. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening as always, and I will talk to you all later. All right, bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Luke Humphrey Running Podcast with your host, Luke Humphrey. If you like our show and want to learn more, please visit us at www.lukehumphrey.running.com for blogs, podcasts, coaching, and training options. See you next time.